Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Thanks so much for joining with us. President Biden turned on the welcome sign. That's what an Arizona border sheriff told Congress. Since the president took office, the number of illegal migrants crossing the southern border has hit historic levels.
In response to the crisis, one Republican has now filed impeachment charges against Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Gelka brings us the latest on the Republican investigation into the president's border policies.
Republicans had promised to investigate the Biden administration's handling of multiple issues when they gained control of the House chamber. First up, and maybe the most pressing matter, the southern border. During the first in a series of border hearings, the Judiciary Committee heard from multiple people impacted by the unprecedented numbers of people crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. Texan Brandon Dunn emotionally told members about his son Noah's death from fentanyl. He started the Forever 15 project to raise awareness about the drug's dangers.
Noah was the third victim in less than 2 months in Hays County from illicit fentanyl.
Arizona Sheriff Mark Daniels testified how little federal support came to help his border county.
The majority of people we talk to, the migrants that have been smuggled, which I call modern-day slavery, what they're doing to these people, they tell us the reason they're here is because President Biden and the welcoming sign.
As the number of migrant encounters reach historic levels, the panel could move to build a case for impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas.
The Secretary of Homeland Security said the border is closed, the border is secure in March of 2021. Was that true then?
No.
Is it true now?
No.
The Biden administration recently began new policies to address the record number of migrant crossings, including a legal pathway for Venezuelan, Nicaraguan, Haitian, and Cuban immigrants to enter the country. To some Democrats, the hearings amount to a show trial.
The first hearing will showcase the racist tendencies of the extreme MAGA Republican wing of the party that seeks to close the border to refugees from places like Cuba and Venezuela. It almost makes me miss their usual obsession with conspiracy theories and the FBI.
Preliminary data shows that illegal crossings were down 40% in January. Meanwhile, Representative Annie Biggs from Arizona has formally introduced articles of impeachment for Mayorkas. It would be very rare. The only cabinet official to ever get impeached happened way back in 1876. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
Well, we're into new territory in politics when you start seeing cabinet officers being impeached by the U.S. Congress. But here's the reality on the ground. Yes, indeed, President Biden put a welcome sign up on our southern border and absolutely has policies that they will not prosecute for illegal immigration. And you actually get released into the United States. You don't get deported immediately, pending, quote, your trial, close quote. So you look at these policies and say, absolutely, this has made a difference. And here's the real proof of it. When you talk to the immigrants, that's exactly what they say. We heard it was open, and so we came. That's why there's this incredible flood. You have to change it. You have to enforce your borders. Otherwise, you don't have a sovereign nation anymore. There's a reason we have immigration laws, and if you're not going to enforce them, then what in the world are you doing in office? Well, in other news, the Fed has raised interest rates for the 8th time in a row. Efrem Graham has that story and more from the CBN Newsroom. Efrem?
Gordon, the rise in consumer prices continues to slow down. In late December, prices were 6.5% higher over the previous year. That's much lower than the summer high of 9%. Still, Americans are paying about 10% more for food than last year. Yesterday, the Federal Reserve hiked interest rates just 1/4 of a point to keep the slowdown going. The increase means a rise in credit card rates that amounts to about $123 a month for the average family. On the topic of debt, President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy are wrangling over how to pay the nation's bills. In their first Oval Office meeting Wednesday, the two spent about an hour discussing the $31 trillion debt ceiling. The government hit the ceiling about 2 weeks ago and can't borrow more money until Congress votes to raise it. McCarthy wants a promise to cut spending first. The president says there should not be any haggling when it comes to meeting the government's obligations.
I will not let anyone use the full faith and credit of the United States as a bargaining chip. The United States of America, we pay our debts.
I've been very clear. The current path we're on, we cannot sustain. We got to change the directory to put ourselves on a path to balance. How we get there will be our discussions.
The speaker said he had a good meeting with the president and he's confident they can find common ground. Yet another search in the saga surrounding President Biden and stored classified documents. The FBI spent 3.5 hours going through his home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. The White House called the search planned and consensual. The Bureau has already searched his Wilmington home and an old office in Washington. Agents didn't find new documents, but they did remove some handwritten notes from Biden's time as vice president. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle came together for the 71st National Prayer Breakfast this morning. The Brooklyn Tabernacle Singers made a special appearance. The annual multi-faith gathering gives political and religious leaders the chance to meet, pray together, and build relationships. In keeping with tradition, President Biden headlined the event in his remarks, making reference to wisdom from Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware.
I thought it was really incredible what you said, Chris. You said, let's continue the practice of the ministry of presence. The ministry of presence. Being present not just for yourself, but for one another. That's what's expected of those of us in public service. The ministry of presence. It means being there for one another.
For the official event, Liberty Counsel co-sponsored a national gathering of prayer and repentance at the Museum of the Bible that happened yesterday. The breakfast comes after thousands of world leaders, activists, and lawmakers gathered in Washington this week. Their goal is to shine a spotlight on people who are persecuted for their faith and to convince governments to do more to protect them. Caitlin Burke reports from the Religious Freedom Summit.
The International Religious Freedom Summit was created to highlight and advance the issue of religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, all the time. With an uptick of global unrest over the last year, organizers believe that along with being a fundamental human right, religious freedom is also a significant foreign policy issue.
The United States must continue to be a voice for the voiceless who are persecuted for their beliefs.
In our very diverse world, unless the right to freedom of religion exists for everyone, it doesn't truly exist for anyone.
Despite differing political views, honorary congressional co-chairs Mike McCall and Jim McGovern expressed mutual concern about increasing religious persecution worldwide.
Countries where religious freedoms are under attack are often countries where repression and instability are the norm.
Protecting religious freedom isn't just about doing what's right. It's also a matter of national security. By resolving conflict, we can help prevent terrorism at home and abroad. As religious freedoms advance, conflict recedes.
Former Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, says this issue plays a significant role in current global events.
Take Ukraine right now. Ukrainians splitting off a Ukrainian Orthodox Church from the Russian Orthodox Church was one of the things that caused Putin to move. He didn't want Ukraine to break out of the Russian world.
It's Russia's ally China, however, that Brownback believes poses the greatest international threat to religious freedom.
It's an authoritarian regime that's seeking to expand their model and to export their technology to do it.
Dr. Yang Zhongli, a Chinese dissident and human rights activist, blames the Communist Party.
Ultimately, the reason that China has no tolerance for faith is because the CCP wishes to replace human need to worship with a substitute religion centered around the party.
Dr. Zhongli says the evidence is clear. The world just needs to look at what's happened to the Uyghurs, Tibetans, and other faiths to see Beijing systematically eradicating anyone not completely in line with a party-centered allegiance. He's calling on governments to condemn this behavior in the same way they've united against Putin. Brownback says he hopes this summit will help push religious freedom to the next level, making it a top priority at every level of government. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
And we continue to pray for the persecuted. Gordon?
Well, let's continue not just to pray, but also be active to say to countries that are repressing religious minorities within their own borders to say, no, in the international stage, we don't allow this. Under the UN declarations of human rights, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of belief are all central to the principles of the UN. And we need to honor that and have an enforcement mechanism for these countries to say, if you don't honor it, well, then you have no place on the Security Council. You need to be demoted. You need to lose your status. We're seeing that again and again, and whether it's in the Middle East and Muslim countries, in India, where they're passing anti-conversion legislation, in China, where the repression is obvious and the monitoring of their own population is obvious, North Korea, all of these places we need to say, no, there is a much better way to go. And that is to allow people to believe in accordance with the dictates of their conscience. We need to stand for that. And that includes the belief that you won't believe. That needs to be part of it, too. So can we say our ideals really matter, and can we say they really matter on the international stage?